that do YouTube streaming and whatnot.
All right, there we go. We are live. Jameson Lopp, welcome to the Ask Swan AMA. This is the second one we've done. The first one was a couple of weeks ago with Jimmy Song. It's really an honor to have you here. Appreciate your work, man, and thanks for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right, so I've got some questions here from Twitter. I'd like to start with this one because it's a bit of a troll question, and I thought it was kind of funny. And I think you'll be able to deduce the leanings of this particular person. This is Stein Ludwagen from Twitter. He says, neither BTC nor Lightning Network scales. So why would you spend your time building on top of it?
Yes, the scalability question. I thought we had cleared that up by now. But, scaling is an interesting topic because there's more than one type of scaling. And so this is the first thing that I often respond with when someone just said, regardless of how they phrase it, if they say something does scale or doesn't scale as if it's a binary thing, I often have to break down, what are we really talking about when we say scaling? And so most of the time, what I found is when someone says a system scales, or especially when we're talking about decentralized, like peer-to-peer networks, they're usually talking about vertical scaling or scaling up. And from a computer science perspective, this basically means we're going to throw more resources at the problem, and as a result, it's going to process more events, more data, et cetera, et cetera. You can do that with almost anything. I mean, it's just a brute force, way to push more processing through a system. Is you throw more CPUs, RAM, bandwidth, whatever at the system. And that's not really an interesting way of scaling, at least from a computer science perspective. What's more interesting is when you can find a way to scale a system that does not also scale the cost of running the system at the same rate that you're scaling the amount of data that's being processed in. And this is generally considered to be horizontal scaling or scaling out. And so when it comes to the scalability debate, I think what we've seen over the past few years is that the Bitcoin ecosystem, community, whatever you want to call it, the thing that is Bitcoin from a market perspective has decided that they want to prioritize scaling out, scaling horizontally, even though that means that there's going to be pressure from the fact that you're not going to be able to push anything you want to onto the network, onto the blockchain. And so it creates more challenges. It's a harder way of scaling from a technical standpoint. It also creates more pain and more pressure points at many different parts of the ecosystem. Many different participants in the ecosystem feel pressure because they can't do whatever they want at very low cost. And fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to view it, I think that is a necessary thing if we want to take this more difficult path, is that there needs to be some sort of incentive, some sort of pressure that makes the various entities and participants in the system put more effort into figuring out how to use the system more efficiently, how to scale out in ways that don't necessarily create more data usage and increase resource requirements for anyone who wants to operate a node on the system. And so that's why we end up with layer 2 networks and side chains. And that's why, the complexity of the system is growing. It's because people are innovating and trying to find ways to meet the desired attributes of the system without changing the fundamental base layer itself.
What are the risks of potentially changing the base layer? Well, obviously we've all decided that have a consensus that soft forks are the way to go. Hard forks are quite risky unless absolutely necessary, and broad consensus on the network. What are the risks to implementing more privacy on the base layer? Do you favor that potential approach? And if so, which proposals are you in favor of?
Well, I think almost everyone wants more privacy. The biggest point of contention, I think, is around privacy that obscures the values. So, something like a ZK snark style transaction format where you can't even see what the values are in the transaction. Obviously, that is about the strongest form of privacy you can get. The trade-off and the reason why I don't think that we'll see that happen in the Bitcoin base layer is because it also breaks a fundamental desired aspect of the system, which is auditability of the total money supply. So I think one of the better solutions, and once again, this is the type of thing that's going to take a while to get to, but essentially creating better mixing technology, especially through the use of signature aggregation. This is where I think Schnorr signatures, which we're probably going to talk about at some point, will come into play. Like we have this coin join, we have multiple different coin join implementations. None of them are really that awesome because in most cases it's at the very least it's apparent that you are doing a coin join, and that in and of itself is pretty bad. And we've seen some of the fallout from that recently of various service providers banning users that they think are coin joining at some point. And so if we can create technology that allows you to do coin join in a way that's not even obvious, then I think that is going to provide much better way to sort of break the linkability, give us better fungibility.
Yeah, and we do have additional privacy options, or at least potential, on second layers and side chains. If I understand correctly, Liquid has confidential transactions, for instance, so you can kind of throw your peg in there and make whatever transactions you need to make.
The question is like, how do you move money around in a way that isn't easy to trace? And there have always been ways to hop between different blockchains, usually through centralized swapping services, Shapeshift-esque stuff. Theoretically, there are ways to do atomic swaps, though I can't think of any extremely user-friendly software that lets you do that. But if you want to break linkability, then you just go to a different blockchain and come back and potentially do that through side chains. It really depends on what the pegging mechanism is. And also, I think actually just at MIT Bitcoin a few weeks ago, James Prestwich was making an argument that the majority of quote unquote atomic swap operations are actually happening through Lightning. And so we may very well see something where, you can go into Lightning and come out, a completely different blockchain. And that would also provide much better unlinkability.
What is your assessment of current mixing options? The two obviously most popular are Samurai and Wasabi. What are your takes on those two systems?
I mean, they seem fine. Like I said, I've played around with some of them, but like even myself, I don't actively mix my coins because I don't really see the point in identifying myself as doing that. I'm waiting for better technology that can't even be fingerprinted, and I actually have a blog post that I haven't published, but I did some like join market testing last year. So I was trying to figure out, well, is this type of system even logical? Like, are the incentives aligned? I, at the current point in time, don't really feel interested in paying money to mix because I consider it not to be like a perfect privacy solution. Like I would probably pay for something that I consider to be perfect privacy. But I would potentially be interested in, acting as a maker on those markets and getting paid to help other people mix. And so I played around with that some last year and basically came to the conclusion that it's not enough activity going on. And so that results in multiple problems, one of which is there's just probably not a big enough market for people to be incentivized to go to the trouble of doing this. There's the security implications of, I much prefer having the vast majority of my private keys be in a decentralized multi-sig cold storage. It's geographically separated, and if I'm going to be mixing, like, that requires you to put them in a hot wallet. There's a lot of different trade-offs that disincentivize me from using any of the current mixing software. Though, if I wanted to make a payment for something that I wanted to reduce the linkability to, say, my main stash that's in cold storage, then I think it would make sense you peel off some, mix it up a bit, and then potentially even make the payment, from the mixing software. That is a use case that I think does make sense, but it's not something that I do on a regular basis.
How will Schnorr and/or Taproot affect the viability and quality of mixing services? Cool.
I think it's most interesting because it allows us to have signature aggregation so that you can't necessarily even see how many different people are participating in a particular spending operation. You know, that that's great for mixing. It's also just great for, like, what we're doing at Casa with having a regular multi-sig wallet, where the sort of on-chain privacy aspect is not great if you're using, for example, our 3 of 5 multi-sig, just because there's not a ton of other people on the blockchain that are using 3 of 5 multi-sig. So, you're kind of standing out. And it's the same thing with mixing. Is the whole point is to be hiding within the crowd. You want your total anonymity set to be as large as possible. And we can't really expect the size of these anonymity sets to grow unless it becomes easier, cheaper, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. The mixing transactions are just, obvious, like stick out like a sore thumb on the blockchain. So they're really easy to see. But you're saying that Schnorr will obscure, like the 100 signatures that happen on a coin join transaction, for instance. Okay, cool. All right. Got a question for you from Daniel Prince, asking via Twitter. He's asking about undoxing, and I think he knows that you've written extensively about this and presented about it. Definitely aware of that work myself. But it's been about 1.5 years since you published a modest privacy protection proposal. How are your efforts faring so far at this point?
It's pretty good. I mean, I've on a regular basis, I hire investigators to try to track me down, and that has also gone well. I've been surprised by how difficult it is. Though there have been mistakes made. Like, I do know of some data leaks that occurred. They're very small, but it's always a learning experience. And so next time I go through all of this, I have a few changes I'm going to be making. Really, the biggest change that I intend to make is that I don't think that it's possible to get a perfect privacy setup, mainly due to the complexity. If you read through that post, you saw it was really long. That's only like starting to scratch the surface. If people really want to understand how far you can take it, you should definitely read Extreme Privacy by Michael Basil. And really, I think what is necessary is to have a privacy expert who acts as a proxy for you during the process of moving and setting up all of these new legal entities, and even the process of, like, finding where you're going to live. It's because some of the small data leaks that I saw happen were just with the third parties that I had no choice but to interact with. So whether that's lawyers, bankers, whatever, the people that were a necessary part of the process, if they know your name, if they know any information about you, then there's always the possibility that they might unintentionally leak that information. And it's very difficult simply because so many businesses have processes in place where they just put all your information into a database, and then that database can get sucked into any number of other systems like marketing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So like I almost so under optimal conditions, I should never receive anything in my name to my physical residence. And there have been one or two times when that's happened. And it's always been some stupid marketing related thing where I ended up having to go talk to the entity that sent it to me and be like, I thought we said this wasn't going to go into any marketing databases. And then they're like, oh, I don't know how that happened. And,
Uh-huh.
like, yeah, great. So, that it's just a testament to like how difficult it is to contain information. Information wants to be free, and once you give it to anybody, it's potentially game over. um, but like I said, it's been going well since I got it all set up. Other than like one or two small hiccups, it's a very big hill to climb to actually get everything set up, but the maintenance on it is pretty minimal. Once you've got it going, it's just autopilot.
Nice. That's awesome. It's good to hear and encouraging as well. There will there may be coming a time, in sooner than we had imagined, that Bitcoiners will need to take similar precautions. So yeah, speaking of the pandemic, the situation that we find ourselves in, Trapper on Twitter asks, he'd like to know how prepared you were for a pandemic event like this, and what would you do different next time now that it's upon us?
Well, at least for what has happened so far, I've been very well prepared. If it turned into like a total zombie outbreak and breakdown of all law and order, that could be a different story. Like I'm not at what I would consider to be like the final form of my desired bug out type of stuff. Like I don't have a bunker in New Zealand like a number of billionaires do, for example.
Yeah.
But I have modest food, water, etc. supply. These are things that I set up years ago, so I didn't change anything. Like once all this stuff came out, I guess I bought a box of surgical masks, but I already had gloves. I already had, if need be, like real like biological gas mask type stuff, but that's only for like real extreme emergency situations. So there's nothing that I would say at this point that I would have changed, other than there was some bad timing around me going to MIT Bitcoin Expo in Boston right when they were starting to have outbreaks and stuff. It's been 1 week since then, and I guess we give it one more week and see. But I think that in general, the measures that we took were working pretty well. I mean, I declined more handshakes than I could count. It was definitely this like awkward social reflex that everyone was having of trying to do handshakes, but otherwise seemed to go pretty well.
Full-time Bitcoin has a kind of related question, preparation, self-defense question. He asks, what is the best way to legally buy NFA items like suppressors or SBRs? He said he had a feeling that you've done some digging on the topic and would like to hear from you.
Yes, that is what the Lopp Defense Trust exists for. Mm-hmm. And I ended up going the trust route mainly because it's easier to do transfers. You can make changes to a trust without having to go through the process of doing actual NFA transfers. So even though I haven't actually engaged in any sort of transfers or anything other than actually acquiring stuff, that was basically the result of the research that I did a number of years ago and talking to my local dealer. And it was really easy. I mean, it took me maybe 30 minutes going to a bank and telling them I need to set up a trust, and we set up an account for the trust, and then you put like $20 in the account, and that's it. You're good to go. Then you just have to submit all the paperwork, pay your $200 tax, and wait a year for the ATF to sign off on it.
Wait a year. Is that like a legal prescription, or are you saying it just takes a long time, like bureaucracy?
No, I don't think there's any legally required minimum or maximum on it.
Okay.
It's just comes down to what the current backlog is, and at least for the past several years, I don't think the backlog has ever really gone below about 9 months.
Okay. What are you most concerned about, from the fallout from this pandemic?
Well, I think the biggest question is, um, will these measures that people are taking currently with social distancing, and will potential vaccines and other drugs that may help increase the survival rate of people who get infected, will that be enough to quash the epidemic in one round, or uh, are we going to have to go through multiple rounds of this kind of like bouncing back and forth and back and forth, or will there be mutations that cause there to be multiple rounds of it? That's really the main question. Is this going to be more of a several month thing, or a sustained like 1 to 2 year thing, or is this the new normal? That's, I guess, one thing that I don't think anyone can really answer. It's mostly speculation at this point.
Yeah, there's lots of speculation at this point. I mean, this will be more speculation, but pass if you'd like to, or just answer the best you can. But um, the economic fallout is one of the biggest concerns I have. And I recently, I think, yeah, just yesterday, we found out that my daughter and my son's school has been canceled for the rest of the year. And I was sort of surprised that happened so quickly. I was thinking that we'd sort of get like 2-week extensions for a while. It was a signal, though, to everyone that things are getting pretty serious. We think that this is going to last into the summer at least. And so, restaurants and bars closing, all kinds of gatherings, meetings, conferences, all kinds of economic activity will be basically suspended. The Federal Reserve can print a bunch of money. They can airdrop $1,000 to each American. I don't see how we can stop some kind of the house of cards being tipped over by this event.
Yeah, and maybe that is how you can explain the like stock market volatility of this kind of the speculation between, is this going to be a several week thing, or is it going to be a multi-month or even multi-year thing? And that's when this first started happening and like the stock market first had its correction, I was looking at it and I was like, I don't see how one bad quarter of an economy is worth justifying cutting the valuation of companies almost in half.
Right.
But if it is more prolonged thing, I can definitely see how that could result in sort of a downward spiral from a number of different angles.
Yeah. Any silver linings that you can think of that might come out of this?
Yeah, several. I mean, one of the biggest things is, just with the information age, it seemed to me, I have been working full time remotely from home for over 5 years now. And I've just been looking around. I'm like, I don't understand why I'm still in such a small minority on this, because I have, a large peer group of white collar professionals who mostly, just work with information, or, we do communications with people over phone or internet or whatever. And so, why are so many people having to spend, even like 1 to 2 hours every day physically commuting to a communal space? I do understand there are some pros and cons to that, of like facilitating higher bandwidth communication and like overhearing things that you might not otherwise. But I do believe that we have the tools available to make up for that difference. And so, one thing that we actually started doing, as soon as I started working at BitGo, I was their first remote employee. We were trying to figure out, how do we make this work? How do we make it so Jameson doesn't feel like he's the one odd guy out who's 3,000 miles away from everybody else? And the first thing we did was we actually bought one of those iPads on two wheels, and I could
Uh-huh.
literally like cart myself around the office and go up to somebody's desk. And of course, as we started adding more remote employees, that didn't really scale well. So what we ended up doing is we just put video conferencing in every room, and then we'd have a background video conference, during office hours, where if you were working remotely, you were generally expected to be on the background video conference where you're on a big screen in a room where a lot of your other coworkers are also physically hanging out. And so you would still have that ability to just unmute yourself and put a question out there and have that same type of real-time dialogue back and forth. And we do similar stuff at Casa, where uh, Casa is actually 100% remote company. So
Mhm.
we have sort of more breakdown, by division. But if you want to just hang out, the only weird thing there is making sure that you remember to keep yourself on mute by default. Otherwise, you can have some dogs barking or babies crying in the background, the type of
Oh
thing.
yeah.
Other than that, I mean, I think that you can generally make up for a lot of what you lose.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I've been fully remote for 10 years, over 10 years now. And Swan, the company I'm working with now, we're a new Bitcoin company. We're all remote all over the country. We have some people consulting with us and, internationally. And yeah, I mean, there's no difference between being in a room with someone and being online with someone with communications tools like Slack and Zoom. And it's just easy, super easy to hop in and out of each other's space. And you recently wrote an article, I guess just a few days ago, you dropped it about VR. And what do you think? I mean, I have a PSVR, so I've experienced the gaming. It's very immersive. It's definitely exceeded my expectations and has retained my interest. It's not just some novelty, and my family loves it. But I have not received my Oculus Quest yet, which is on its way. So I have not participated really in any like community VR events. What is the experience like? How authentic is it for you? And do you think it's viable in the next few years that remote workers could use, VR as a place to actually meet and get work done?
I don't know about the working part. I know there are some tools for like programming in VR, though I haven't tried them out. But I think just for meetups, just for hanging out, that has worked pretty well. We have
Hmm.
experienced a number of complications on the presentation side of things, and we've been experimenting with different platforms there. Um, I think the takeaway so far is that VR chat is the best just for hanging out. And Altspace VR is the best for presentations because they have various customized worlds where administrators have different functionality of like muting everybody in the audience, or asking for people to raise their hands and selectively unmuting. Um, though in general, there are technical challenges. I don't think any of these platforms does very well over maybe 50 or 100 people. We haven't hit that yet, but we're definitely on the verge of it. Actually, Mozilla Hubs seem to be the worst performing, but that was not it was not a surprise because it's an in-browser experience. So
Hmm.
um, I didn't expect that to work as well as like native apps. Also, there's just some issues where we've found if the presenter is not natively in VR, then you have to do some weird, funky stuff to try to like redirect a stream into VR, and then you get
Hmm.
lag, and you lose a lot of the like real time experience back and forth. So I think it really is best for everyone to be natively in VR, if at all possible, for the best experience.
How does it feel? I mean, what's your like personal experience as a human, the visceral experience? Is it better than, a video chat like this? Does it fundamentally different at all?
So, for one-on-one video chat, I think this is fine. But when you want to do group stuff, it's cool because um, you can be more expressive. you can basically set your avatar to be whatever you want. And then you can even put on various body trackers. Now, normally with most of the real VR sets, you'll at least get hand tracking, but you can even for some platforms buy trackers that go on like your feet and your waist, and so that gives you like another added element of expressiveness, I guess.
Dancing, VR dancing.
Yeah, basically. And also I think one of the it's more interesting to compare the large groups to like doing a meetup or a conference. And from that standpoint, there are things that you can do in VR that it's just a lot more awkward or sometimes impossible to do in real life, where if someone's bugging you, like you can literally block or mute them just with a click of a button. Like you don't have to spend time like trying to evade them or be nice to them and get them to go away so that you can talk to someone that you really want to. But then there's just a lot of other social challenges, stuff that I also covered in that post, sort of more future thinking about, how are these type of systems going to need to evolve if we do want them to be usable and, provide even better experience than we're currently seeing in meat space.
All right, I want to switch back to some tech. I have a few more questions that have come in while we've been talking. So this is back to a lightning layer. We have a question from an anonymous source that's asking about your take on lightning and gaming. Is gaming going to be the first mass use case for lightning?
Well, it seems like for a lot of these things, the first mass use case is trading and gambling and other financial type of products. And I would say most advanced financial products are just different forms of gambling. So that's why like Bitfinex adding Lightning was interesting. Actually, I think like straight roulette and other gambling products were some of the first apps that were on Lightning as well.
Yeah.
Gaming, I know that there are a few games out there, like other than gambling games, which I haven't tried myself, but I guess the real question comes down to how well integrated can the Lightning payment experience be into the game itself. From like even just like stepping back a bit, one thing, an idea that I actually had a number of years ago was just like looking at TV game shows and saying what it's kind of crazy that so many people like watching TV game shows, because in many cases you can't even play along. I mean, you can kind of play along for Jeopardy or some quiz shows or whatever, but like if you're just like watching people that are doing actions in the physical world where you can't be there, you can't be doing whatever they're doing, what's really the fun in that? Well, what if you could integrate some sort of payment system into whatever these game shows are, so that either you can make decisions along with players to do certain things and then get rewarded or lose as a result, or perhaps even bet on the players themselves that are in the games, and then based on how well they do, you win or lose money. So which is funny. I guess a lot of this still comes down to gambling in many cases once again, but at the very least you can get like a better interactivity type of experience rather than just like having one way broadcast mechanism. And I could see that also being the case for video games. Now, whether or not it's you are playing the video game and you are paying for things or getting paid based on the actions that you're doing, the decisions you're making, or even, I mean, watching people play video games is a huge industry now. And I could see it once again, people making various type of bets while watching other people play, whether video games or sports or whatever. You just need to have some sort of overlay on top of the actual video that you're watching.
Yeah. What do you think about Jack Mallers' strike service? It seems like it could be a big game changer. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I haven't tried it myself, but this is what we need more of is bridging the
Mm.
new financial system to the old one. And if I recall correctly, like it's not nearly as onerous as like setting up a Coinbase account or anything, right? So
Yeah, it's just
that's
you just need a bank account, a debit card, and as my the way I understand it is merchants. It really just allows any merchant who wants to make BTC to do that. They don't have to rely on the customers being Bitcoin users. You can just use your debit card, and then it goes through the strike service. And the other problem it solves is the tax issue. So you're not actually buying or selling Bitcoin. Strike handles all of the tax implications. So
that's what
yeah,
we
I mean,
need.
it seems to be, yeah, it's not, I mean, earning Bitcoin is, it's kind of one of the best ways to, have Bitcoin privately, because you don't have to go through some KYC exchange, and if you're not mining, it's, I think, one of the only other kind of really viable options for, the mass, like most of us, to gain Bitcoin privately. Yeah, it's definitely an easier way than using BISC or other like direct peer-to-peer transactions, etc. So I'm excited to see it take place, and I hope it grows. I hope the service grows and merchants start accepting more Bitcoin. Could bootstrap that chicken and egg problem. If you kind of bootstrap one side, then merchants have Bitcoin to spend, so they'll start spending Bitcoin on the services they need for to run their own businesses. So staying on Lightning, this is an interesting question, and yeah, I'm not sure if it like how to answer it exactly, but maybe you will have a take on it. This is from Liberty BTC, and they ask, does Gresham's law that good money drives out bad apply to competing second layer networks? Is it any different on a second layer network than it would be on the base layer?
Yeah, this one's tricky. Partially because I'm not an economist or even a financial expert. I'm a computer scientist.
Yeah.
But my understanding is that Gresham's law is more about when you have like a fiat money or a money that is legal tender that is basically like required by your government to be accepted as money, and then that is competing against some other form of commodity money that has its own value. And I think the idea behind this is that the um, the the bad money, the inflated value, government enforced money will actually end up becoming the most widely used one. Maybe that's because everyone wants to hold on to their commodity money because they know that what the value actually is.
Yep.
Once again, I'm not a like deep financial or economist type of expert, but when you then try to apply that to like second layer networks, I don't think that it really matters. A second layer network money could be a commodity money, or it could be a like government operated or government mandated type of money. So I think that's like the more important question, rather than
Right.
like what is the technical operation of the money or the payment network itself. So I think the question is, it depends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. I don't think there's quite a clear answer, and I'm not sure if I could consider all of the potential implications. But my instinct is to say that it doesn't matter what kind of layer of a system you're on. The properties of money are really what governs the outcomes of Gresham's law.
Yeah, though, I mean, another potential aspect, and we're kind of speculating on what the person is asking here, but I think I have also seen some chatter of like, well, could the second layer networks be the bad money and the first layer networks be the good money because of various technical limitations? And, one way you could approach that, for example, is the fact that on the second layer network, you can even go to sub Satoshi values. You can also transfer value that is lower than like essentially the on-chain fee amount. So you get into kind of some weird situations there once you go down to this really, really granular level of, maybe this money is actually less valuable on the second layer network, at least at the tiny values. But I think that ultimately that becomes kind of a wash, because the point of using the second layer networks is that you're using them so much that the value transfer that you're doing is actually fairly high and eventually overcomes and overrides the amount of value that you would have otherwise been spending in on-chain fees. But
that makes sense. Yeah.
It's almost more of a philosophical question, I guess.
Yeah. That makes sense. Good takes. Okay. One more question about tech, and then we'll wrap up with some Casa talk. So we knew, most Bitcoiners know at this point about Schnorr and about Taproot, how they work, what they're going to bring to the table. It looks like they will be merged into the base layer at some point, just kind of a matter of time to work through the process and the due diligence. What other tech that we might have not heard of, the kind of average Bitcoiner might not have heard of, that's on the horizon that is exciting to you?
Well, I would say like the most innovation that is happening is actually on the second layer networks. And like it's hard to even keep track of everything that's going on there. And so I think the biggest questions for me, or the things that we need to answer, are what can we do to make it easier and more robust for enterprises to get onto these second layer networks. We've seen some work around that by Assured Bits, for example, with coming up with ways to have redundant failover Lightning nodes. There's also just a ton of liquidity management issues, and Alex Bosworth is constantly putting out new takes and education around things that he's learned and is working on with regard to liquidity management. And none of it's like particularly sexy stuff, right? Where we're basically talking about like plumbing. And trying to make changes that make this second layer infrastructure more robust and more usable, both for individuals and enterprise. And actually, the talk that I gave last year at the Lightning conference was mainly around how important that is for enterprises to be able to join the Lightning network and know that they're not really high risk of losing all of their funds, and that it all ties in together, because my argument was that it's actually a liquidity issue at the end of the day, due to the way that money flows. Like, we need to, if we want to have these quote unquote like circular economies, then we can't just have a bunch of individuals that are on the Lightning network, because day-to-day life, it's not individuals paying individuals. It's mostly individuals paying enterprises, and then occasionally getting paid by the enterprise or two that they are working for. From stuff that I guess is more interesting to individual users, since I focus on security most of the time, I'm interested in things that can allow you to improve your security. One of those, which we had another talk about at MIT Bitcoin, was Jeremy Rubin's op. Well, he changed the name of it. I think it's opt template verify now. Op check template verify. It was like op secure the bag, and
Yeah.
the whole idea behind that is that you can set up sort of templates for like pre-signed transactions, and what I would basically call it like UTXO control flow, so that you can enter into much more complex spending, uh, conditional like spending branches of. One example of this is like a sort of a vault like product where you have your really cold storage, and then UTXOs can be spent in certain ways that may send them to a hot wallet or a warm wallet, and basically set various timeouts and signing thresholds to make sure that it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, for an attacker to just steal all of your money, because you have some like intermediary states that would be required before someone could just spend arbitrarily to any address. Sort of just like, adding more layers of security on chain, with quote unquote smart contracts.
Right.
So that if something goes wrong, the alarm bells can go off, and you can basically claw back all of your money before it goes off to an address that you don't control.
Like the Gmail undo button.
Basically, yeah.
That's nice. That'll be nice. That's a user experience that I think freaks a lot of new Bitcoiners out. It's hard to get over the idea of like instant finality once you hit that send button. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about Casa a bit, man. How are things going at Casa? What's new on the horizon? Yeah, what's the deal with the situation with Casa? I just got my node 2, by the way. It's sitting right here next to me.
Limited edition.
Yeah.
It was kind of a weird situation where I think most people know of Casa as a node company, but it's actually not our original product. It was just a fun little project that we started working on a little over a year ago, and it just ended up being a lot more popular than we anticipated. And I think from a sort of marketing and branding perspective, that was also what got a lot of interest from people. But really, we are fundamentally a what we call, personal sovereignty company, where we're trying to help people help themselves. And the first product that we ever had was a self-custody, multi-sig cold storage solution. So we ended up basically putting the node on hold for now. I think it very well may come back at some point in the future. It actually, I think, ended up being well timed with the whole coronavirus thing, because since we no longer have a physical product, we no longer have to have physical operation where we have people coming together and actually building these things. We don't have to worry about supply chains, et cetera, et cetera. But essentially, what we think the service that we've been providing is helping people store their wealth. And this is compare and contrast. You have the multi-sig product, which is potentially protecting nearly unlimited amount of money, in some cases basically people's life savings, and on the other hand, the node is a fun little experimental cutting edge product where people might have a few $100s or $1,000 or something tied up in it, but it's really more of a, hey, check out this cool stuff that we can do now product, rather than a I need something that will help me sleep at night so I'm not worried about my life savings type of thing. So we've gone back and we're focusing more on Keymaster. We've just got a number of small improvements that we're continually tweaking. We did just like add cold card support, which has actually been one of the more cutting edge things. Like cold card is still, I think very new in terms of its operation and support with other software, and adding PSBT support was also a decent amount of work. And I'm hoping that the rest of the ecosystem will catch up with that soon. Um, Especially because it will be great when that like any partially signed transaction that you create in any wallet can be imported into some other wallet software, and it will understand it and be able to work with it. So we're still in the early days on that. But also, a lot of what we do is just based on feedback from our existing customers. And so that's why we also just announced our inheritance product, is that this is something that not many people, I think, in the space put a lot of thought into. But I think that as the space is maturing, as Bitcoin holders are continuing and to go through significant life events, building families, starting to look at their wealth as an intergenerational wealth rather than just, oh, I've got some money and I'll figure out what to do with it later. These are the type of things that we're just getting more requests from people about, and also just operational security, privacy in general. There's a lot of different ways that we can take this product, but feedback is very important for us. And I mean, I got into Casa because I wanted to build a product for myself.
Yeah.
I had realized that, even though I had been working at BitGo doing multi-sig stuff for 3 years, that my own solution for cold storage was fairly convoluted, and my own inheritance setup was extremely complicated, and I wasn't 100% sure that if I got hit by a truck that my heirs would be able to recover it. And so I felt like, if I feel a need to make this more user friendly and simple, then I suspect there's probably a decent market out there, a decent gap in the market where there's demand for this. And so we're trying to build both for the OG Bitcoiner, but also just for the mainstream of how can Bitcoin ever go mainstream if you can't have a normal non-technical human come into it and feel confident that they can manage their own private keys. Asking people to follow extremely detailed technical instructions is just a non-starter. And I think that type of user experience will result in one of two things: either just stagnation of adoption, or adoption from the standpoint that people just buy their coin on an exchange and leave it there and never actually take control of it. And I don't really want to see either one of those play out.
Yeah, that's an attack vector, really. This centralization of a bunch of Bitcoin in control of a single entity, and yeah, we've got to work on that for sure. I personally did not have multi-sig set up when I signed up with Casa, and I was really I insta ordered the first node that came out, just because I was I had a node going on an old laptop, but I was excited to kind of be a part of something new, and I figured it would be kind of fun to have it as a piece in a collection. But that's when I got into the gold multi-sig service. So easy to set up, and the fact that it's seedless, I think, is also really important. Do you want to talk a bit about the seedless aspect of the multi-sig products?
Yeah. And by the way, the node is not dead. Actually, we'll have a blog post about the node tomorrow, so tune in.
You mean the first one?
No, V2
mean?
node. We're actually
Okay,
going to
gotcha.
be releasing instructions for do-it-yourself Casa nodes. But
Nice.
yeah, the seedless thing, it's interesting. I think we're the only service that actually does this, but this was one of the things when we were thinking through the security model of your own multi-sig setup. And when we started going down the path of, okay, obviously we want to use hardware devices to help secure stuff. Well, you set up your hardware device, you have to write down your seed phrase and store it securely somehow, whether it's metal, paper, whatever. And we hit a wall around that of like, how do we ensure that the user is storing, what is usually just clear text seed phrase. It's not encrypted or anything, so it's potentially vulnerable to physical attackers, potentially vulnerable to various physical disasters, and so we actually got to the point of realizing, well, if you have a large enough threshold of keys and you're putting them in a diverse set of environments, then you can get to the point where the likelihood that you lose um, enough of these devices that you can't reconstitute your wallet goes down extremely low. It's hard to put a number on this, but
Yeah.
it depends on a lot of variables of what decisions you make on how you distribute the keys. And once we realize that as long as you have the threshold of keys, then you can always just do a key rotation of spend from the existing key set and modify the current keys that are part of it. So this is how we came up with the idea of, okay, we just tell users not to bother storing the seed phrase because it's too complicated and it's too hard to ensure that they're going to like follow the best practices. Instead, we're going to rely upon the physical separation of the devices and the physical security of the devices. And so now if something happens to a device, if it gets lost, stolen, broken, whatever, we actually have the functionality built into our app where you just click a button and you say, this device is compromised, I need to replace it. You go buy a new one, you plug it in, we suck the public keys off of it, and then we walk you through this guided key rotation process. And we think that's a lot more user friendly. It's you can definitely argue about the security implications of whether it's more or less secure. There's a lot of variables that go on there, but just from the simplification of the security model, we found it a lot easier to reason about. And I mean, we have a 40-page document about our security model on our website if anyone really wants to dig into all of the details and like the reasoning behind like why we chose that, all of the threats that we are trying to mitigate against, and why we believe this seedless setup with geographically separated hardware devices is actually robust against every conceivable threat and loss vector.
That's great, man. And I have been through that document. And if you're a Casa customer out there, or just curious about how this all works, and thinking about becoming a Casa customer, read it, man. It's an education on Bitcoin security in general. So I would definitely recommend it, and I'll link to it here in our show notes on YouTube and on the podcast. Jameson, man, thanks so much for your time. I'll let you get back to work. Appreciate it. Appreciate your work, and take care, man.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Stay safe out there. Bye.